Supervisor Banske from February 28, 2013. This is back from the 28th. I think we've reviewed it thoroughly. What is the pleasure of the board?
I make a motion to accept and approve the budget amendment as described.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yes, I'd like to have an opportunity to speak. I did not support this budget resolution when it was first presented to us on February 28th. I cannot support it tonight for reasons that I will proceed to explain. To those of you who want to amend the 2012 budget at this late date, I offer the following. You're attempting to squirt perfume on the pig to mask our mistakes. Don't look to me to help you squirt that perfume. I want to acknowledge our mistakes, I want to learn from them, and I want to move on. We're dealing with a very serious issue here. In 2011 and 2012, we violated Wisconsin statutes, those are the laws of our state, and we violated our own town ordinances, portions of which largely parallel those Wisconsin statutes. We dispersed money in excess of our budgetary appropriations, and we did so improperly. The biggest mistakes in terms of the amount of those overages were for legal fees. In 2011, we spent $241,280.
Mr. Fisher, could you just hold a moment? We have a
Sure.
disruption in the audience.
Yep.
Yes, could you please sit down?
I've got, I think, what you might have. If people want to momentarily have a copy of what I'm going to go through with you. In 2011, we budgeted $90,000 for legal fees. We spent $241,280. In 2012, we budgeted $150,000 and we spent $254,000 approximately. I'm going to take a little bit of time here to try to explain this issue. It gets a bit complicated, get into the weeds a bit, but I'm going to try to explain it in simple terms as best I can. And to that end, that which I've passed down the table, and I think there are some extra copies in the back of the room on the table, is a summary sheet that I put together to try to identify in simple terms the issues that we're dealing with. If you look at the first page, and it's printed back to back, page 1 of 2, you look at the part that's highlighted in blue. It's on the top, our own Waukesha Town Code of Ordinances, section 2-3-4. It identifies powers and duties of the town board chairperson. And it says that one of the duties is to supervise the administration of the Wisconsin statutes relating to town and town operations to see that those state statutes are faithfully executed. Right beneath that, it also identifies the duty of the town chairperson to act on behalf of the board to see to it that our town orders and town ordinances are obeyed. That basically makes the town chairperson our chief law enforcement officer, if you will, with regard to faithfully executing and following those statutes and ordinances. There's a parallel in Wisconsin statutes which actually drives part of that. You can see that on the first page highlighted in blue just below the middle of the page that has those same words, basically about requiring the town chairperson to faithfully execute the administration statutes and see to it that town ordinances are obeyed. The second component on the sheet is what is highlighted in yellow, and it deals with spending town funds in accordance with the appropriation or the set aside. Our town ordinance says no money shall be drawn from the treasury of the town, nor shall any obligation for the expenditure of money be incurred except in pursuance of the annual appropriation in the adopted budget. At the close of the fiscal year, any unencumbered balance or any appropriation shall revert to the general fund and should be subject to reappropriation. If you look towards the bottom of page 1 of 2 in yellow, much of that same verbiage is in Wisconsin Statute 6590 that says the amounts of the various appropriations and the purposes for such appropriations stated in a budget required into the previous subsection may not be changed unless authorized by a 2/3 vote of the entire membership of the governing body of the municipality. So that's clear and that's consistent. On the same front page there, page 1 of 2 in green, relative to our town of Waukesha Code of Ordinances, there's a provision in there regarding disbursements from the town treasury. It's clear, it says payments shall be made from the town treasury under, and it references a section of state statutes that I think has been renumbered. It refers to 66042. I think it is now numbered 660607, but that's irrelevant to the content of it. But it says after the town clerk reviews and approves in writing each bill or voucher as a proper charge against the treasury, having determined that funds are available under the town budget to pay the bill or voucher. And that parallels Chapter 66, General Municipality Law of State Statutes, which says no order may be issued by a town clerk in excess of funds available or appropriated for the purpose for which the order is drawn. I put a couple of other things that I think are noteworthy on the back or page 2 of the piece of paper. For those of you who might have been here at the meeting 2 weeks ago tonight, there was some discussion. I think it is noteworthy. Our town auditor and town financial advisor, Renee Messing, was here, along with one of her associates. And significantly in there, you can read that to yourselves, but there was an email exchange back in March of 2012, a little over a year ago, between Jamie, Angie, and Renee. You can see that first one on March 8th, inquiring about overages on line items and basically seeking advice or counsel on what to do. Reference in there simply says, and this is verbatim, like our attorney fees, we are over, should we do a motion or not? Clarify what to do. I highlighted in yellow there the response from Renee Messing, and she says, I would suggest that you do a motion on a current basis, and those are the important words, for any significant individual items. The attorney fees are a good example of this. There's then a follow-up by Angie to Renee, which you can read for yourself. That advice, I think, is pretty clear, and we, the town, did not follow that. It's one of the reasons, at least for 2012, we violated state statutes and our own town ordinances. If you go to the bottom of the second page there, and I will probably read this in its entirety, it'll be self-explanatory, but 2 weeks ago, Chairperson Banske, you relied in basically floating this idea of doing budget amendments out in front of us upon the advice that you claim to have gotten from a gentleman by the name of Lee Taroni, I believe it's pronounced, Assistant Legal Counsel at the Wisconsin Towns Association. And I'll paraphrase a bit, but I think the essence of what you told us is he said you can do budget amendments at any point in time, so therefore we can do them now. I will read my email confirmation of a telephone conference that I initiated with him yesterday, and it goes as follows. I informed you that I, Brian Tom Fisher, one of 4 elected at-large supervisors serving the town of Waukesha, I referred to an email exchange between you and our chairperson that occurred on January 4th, 2013, in which you wrote that there is, quote, no prescribed timeline, I put that in parentheses, he was referring to budget amendments, in Wisconsin State Statute 6590 because such a notion is impossible in practice anyway. I go on to write that I said, I indicated to you that some individuals were construing your comment to mean that it was permissible to do budget amendments after the fact, after the money has been spent, and spent in excess of our annual budgetary appropriations. I further indicated to you that I concluded that such a practice was not permissible according to Wisconsin statutes or according to the Code of Ordinances of the Town of Waukesha. That's what we just went through in the first page. Because by state law and local ordinance, budget amendments must be made prior to incurring the expense or dispersing the money. You responded that my conclusion was correct. I went on to write, at the conclusion of our teleconference, I expressed the desire to memorialize our discussion. You advised me to send this email communication to you. At your earliest possible convenience, please confirm that I have accurately represented what I said to you and what you said to me. And Mr. Tironi then responded to my email within the hour, and his response, I think, is very telling. He says, when I wrote that prior correspondence referring to his communication with Chairperson Banske, I meant that a budget can be amended at any time of the year. However, a budget is to be amended prior to a line item being exceeded, not after the fact. He goes on to say, which we didn't even discuss, I didn't solicit, but he says, in fact, the clerk should be checking the town budget's line items to make sure that there is enough money appropriated for each type of bill and only write the check if there is sufficient money. And he gives reference to State Statute 66.0607, paragraph 7, which appears on the bottom of the first page. He goes on to say that board members could also vote against approving bills for which there is no appropriated money. I'll continue. That's abundantly clear what that says. I'm going to spend a minute, I guess, and pose some questions here, and I'm certainly, when I'm finished, going to give people opportunity to respond to these, but I need a few more minutes to kind of fill this out. I don't mean these personally, and I don't mean them unkindly, but we're at a critical point in time here, folks. Jamie, I've got a couple questions to pose to you, and I'm going to pose similar ones to some of the other people here. And they simply go as this: do you understand that a budget is to be amended prior to a line item being exceeded, not after the fact? Again, I'll go through them and you guys can answer to this. Do you understand that the town of Waukesha cannot disperse money from the treasury of the town, in other words, pay bills, in excess of the amount that is appropriated in each item in the budget, the town of Waukesha? And should the town of Waukesha do so, which is in fact what we did, is violating the laws of the state of Wisconsin and the ordinances of the town of Waukesha. Do you understand that the amounts of the appropriations and purposes for such appropriations stated in the budget of the town of Waukesha may not be may not be changed unless authorized by a vote of 2/3 of the 5 members of the town board, which means 4 affirmative votes? Why didn't you follow the advice that you and Angie solicited from Renee Messing and got from her over a year ago in writing, which I just recently saw? Do you understand that at the close of each fiscal year, any unencumbered balance of any appropriation shall revert to the general fund and be subject to reappropriation? There are some provisions in there for capital projects and works that are ongoing to carry forward, but the concept of a carryover per se is not permitted by law. Do you understand that it is your responsibility to check the line items of the budget of the town of Waukesha to make sure that there's enough money for each type of bill, and only write the check if there is sufficient money? And if you fail to do so and the money is spent, the town of Waukesha is violating the laws of the state of Wisconsin and the ordinances of the town of Waukesha. That is a thing we can't undo what's been done in the past, but proactively we got to think about how we're going to deal with in the future. I'm not going to overly belabor this, but Joe, I've got the same questions for you basically. If you understand, except the budget cannot be amended prior to, or is to be amended prior to exceeding anything on a line item basis. Same questions with regarding the disbursement of money, amount of appropriations, and that the money unencumbered balance goes back into the treasury. And I'll give you the opportunity to respond to those.
Thank you, Professor.
No, I
Oh, I
won't
thought
finish.
you said
No, I
I'll give
said
you an
when I'm
opportunity
finished.
to
When I'm finished.
respond.
When I'm finished.
Oh, okay, I thought, okay.
No, I'm
Will
sorry.
you be
When I'm
quite a
finished.
bit longer?
He's gonna belabor it.
Not too much longer. If you don't interrupt, it won't be very long, no.
Please don't be rude.
I'm not being rude. May I finish? Okay. Attorney De La Mora, I have basically those same questions to you. I think these are facts. I think they're abundantly clear. And I have a couple of other things that are deeply concerning to me. And I will direct them to you in the form of a question. You understand that the most egregious errors that we, the town of Waukesha, made during the past 2 years pertain to the disbursement of funds for legal services, which have been far in excess of the appropriations in the budget. I just went through those numbers. And your law firm has been the primary recipient of those expenditures, which have been made in violation of Wisconsin state statutes and the Code of Ordinances of the town of Waukesha. Would you agree with me that as our town attorney, you should be providing direction to the town of Waukesha in an effort to ensure that we faithfully execute Wisconsin statutes and follow our own ordinances? And lastly, or second lastly, I'm going to ask you if you can appreciate my ethical perspective, I guess, that I'm concerned that in a meeting on February 28th, our last meeting, you inserted yourself into discussions and gave advice pertaining to the resolution to amend the budget, which is why it's back on tonight, notwithstanding what I believe is an obvious and significant conflict of interest on your part, which I just explained. Except for responding to my questions and acknowledging your dilemma, I guess I would ask if you would agree with me that you're really duty-bound and would be well advised to limit your involvement in discussion tonight because of your inherent conflict of interest in this matter. Angie, I've got the same questions for you, not surprisingly, that I had for Joe and Jamie and Hector here, but I've got a couple more. I mean, still, the one that I asked Jamie, why didn't you follow the advice that Renee Messing gave us over a year ago? One of my other concerns for you is I ask, we'll come back to this later, but I asked in an email communication back on January 10th for access to the agenda, and here verbatim is what I asked to have put on the agenda. Recommendations for new procedures to guard against exceeding budgetary limits when authorizing and paying the bills and dispersing funds. I requested that that be on the agenda for January 24th.
I'm aware of it.
And you and Jamie decided not to put it on the agenda. Hopefully, if you would have, we could have saved some of the time and effort to get to the point where we're at. You can explain that later. I ask you then, even if you understand and accept your statutory responsibility to be the one to faithfully execute state statutes and obey our town ordinances, I also think that when I give you an opportunity to speak, you need to address some issues that are a little bit personal about the matter in front of us. This is really about issues of substance and issues of law. But so much of this discussion and waste of time is unnecessary. It shouldn't be so difficult for all of us to do the right thing up here. This has taken a tremendous toll on everybody, our town residents, those of us sitting on this side of the table. It makes all of us look like absolute buffoons, and there's nothing good for it in the town of Waukesha. I'm going to take a moment here, and I'm just about wrapped up, but to, I guess, say that I regret to have to use some of the strong words that I've used tonight. Don't really do that by choice, but I think I've got an obligation to do it. I regret it, on one hand. I will tell you and tell everybody in the audience here, with regard to the issues that I've raised here, there is no one who has perfectly clean hands on this issue. Even Mr. Laska sitting there on the video screen, okay? All of us have our hands are a little bit dirty. Supervisor Banske has reminded us from time to time about that. There's no purpose served tonight by trying to get into dispute about who's got dirtier hands. We're not going to get into a contest as to who wants to be the poster boy or poster girl for clean hands. That's not going to get us anyplace. But what I'm beseeching all of you to do is to take a moment here of contrition, I guess, and to acknowledge that what we have done is wrong, which I'm acknowledging. I will accept a measure of responsibility for this. Put on your big girl britches, your big boy britches, and let's move forward with this so we don't repeat this type of thing. You can all, when you respond here, if you want to shoot the messenger, that's your prerogative. It's not going to bother me a bit. I've got a thick skin. But I'm going to ask you, search your conscience a little bit and embrace the message. If you want to shoot the messenger too, have at it. And Angie, I think, is your leader. I might even ask you to go first. You could do a whole lot of good, I think, by a little bit, resetting the clock, resetting the posture of this group. You've taken some shots, but you've given some too, and some of them that are pretty cheap. You basically accused me, and again, I don't take it personally, but of being misguided. I think my compass is headed in the right direction. I'll let other people be the judge of that. We don't have an option up here as to whether we want to follow our state statutes or follow our town ordinances just because we think they're old or inconvenient or whatever. We're duty bound to do that. And they're clear. There's no equivocation about that whatsoever. Even look back, just looked at them here, but amusingly a bit, back on the 27th of December, and there have been some hot words said in this room, but Mr. Merrick, I think, who was back there, called some of these things to our attention. He was, at that meeting or one of the other ones, a bit intemperate, to say the least. I know that Mr. Patty's back there. He's been intemperate and not very well behaved, but he's not alone amongst the group. There's been a lot of us that haven't been very well behaved. But for gosh sakes, I'm about done. I'm going to let all of you address that. Everett and Mike, your guys' hands aren't perfectly clean either. So everybody can buck up to it, but embrace this. The last thing I'm going to ask you is this motion should be withdrawn. You can take a vote on it if you want, but it is a violation of state statutes and town ordinances, and I implore you to withdraw the motion in a second. And thank you, and I'll be delighted to listen to your responses, and thanks for all of you for enduring me.
Angie, I have to be first.
Please, Mike.
Okay. Mr. Fisher, I'm going to be very reserved here, given the fact you do have big shoulders, and so do I. You know, you have a way with words that goes beyond the imagination. You can take dog scat and dish it out, and then at the end, like you so did right now, sprinkle sugar over it and make it good. Or you can take sugar right from the very beginning, and at the end of that, sprinkle dog scat. You're good at it. You're very good at it. I got a question for you. I'm sure you brought this opinion of yours, and I do say opinion, simply because you have a unique way of pulling out particular sentences and putting your slant on it, your twist. What did Mr. Schimmel say, and I'm sure you went to him with your beef? Tell us, please.
No, first of all, I did not go to him, and here's a problem, Mike. I'll leave the sugar and the dog scat to you. Part of the problem is, and you say I'm taking sentences, you can't even see what we're talking about tonight because you're not even here. And I'll stop right there.
I'm going on history. History does have a tendency of repeating itself.
Well, to that point, Mr. Fisher, it would have been helpful of you to provide this documentation to all of us early. You have been a forceful voice in not having items appear at the meeting. But I do find that you do this when it suits you. And I think it's disrespectful to take a shot like that when you could very easily have provided this information to us ahead of time, especially since there appear to be people in the audience who are handing this document out to people in the audience. So this has been well orchestrated, much prepared. And Mr. Fisher, I think it's time for the rest of us to take an opportunity to speak. I believe, I didn't time it, but I'm assuming it was 30 minutes, 45 minutes, so.
Take all the time you would like.
Well, I really, we don't need your permission to do so, but thank you. Okay? I think you've made a lot of accusations tonight, but I think you started with Joe. Or did you start with Jamie? I think you started with Jamie. Well, we're going to leave Jamie out of this for a moment, since, as you pointed out in your document, that I, as chairman, am responsible for what goes on in the office, which includes the budget. But I believe Mr. Banske had tried to interject a while back, and let's give him the courtesy of having an opportunity.
The town of Waukesha is at a crossroads. If you haven't figured it out by now, come to these meetings. You have a faction on the town board that has been going down a certain specific path. And you have another faction going down another certain specific path. The unique aspect with regard to the budget amendments is that all the way into late fall, there was no issues about budget amendments. There were nobody getting all consternated up over this thing. It became a political chip and a political football, and here we are, still playing it well after the Super Bowl. I find it very telling, and as a resident watching a video or sitting here in the hall, I would find it very telling that Mr. Fisher has described a series of questions in a tongue-lashing parent talking to the child point of view that he does. Yet, he leaves out the most senior member of the board, doesn't press Mr. German, doesn't say, wow, Everett, you've actually done budget amendments in the past, albeit you've done them in March of the year preceding the expense being appropriated. But why didn't you speak up, Everett, as we were recklessly navigating our way down the river? Mr. Fisher gives himself a bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card because he places the question to Angie and to me. But yet he was here the entire time, serving on the town board right alongside with me, making motions to approve those very bills that were suddenly now misappropriated, misguided, and mishandled. He made the motions and made the votes to approve every legal expenditure that this town has undertaken, as one resident has pointed out unanimously. Town of Brookfield, City of Waukesha, Dean Lang, chapter and verse, with the exception, because I know Mr. Fisher will point this out, with one exception, which was a resulting action that Angie and I took to go get a letter to cover our butts as a town with regard to a survey map that Mr. Fisher and Mr. German refused to accept the advice of our town attorney. We had to get a second opinion, and that second opinion cost us money, but that second opinion saved us thousands and thousands of dollars. Had we not gotten the second opinion, we would have taken 5 lots privately owned by residents in the town of Waukesha, and by default of no action, the action that Mr. De La Mora suggested that we take, that they refused to take, we would have combined those 5 lots with 5 individual homes into 2 lots with 5 homes on it, which would have resulted in untold craziness for those 5 homeowners. So yes, we took an action which we also feel we were obligated to do to protect the town and follow the ordinances and follow the statutes, because the statutes were very clear and Mr. De La Mora pointed them out. Specifically related to the budget amendments, most communities are doing them after the fact. They're just being done after the books are closed, so you're reconciling them once, just like you might do with a check register at the end of the year. Just like the town of Waukesha has done, going back to 2000 in March. They did 2001 in March of 2002. They did 2002 in March of 2003, and Mr. German played a part in those. There's never any hullabaloo about that. So, did we overspend? On the whole, no. On a line item, yes. Were we all unanimously in agreement about those expenditures? Asterisk, the one expenditure to O'Neill Cannon Holman of $5,000? Yes. But look at those in the whole. We all did it. And to point out and say, you did it, you did it, you did it, or ask individual questions is just as Mike said, you're trying to paint a particular picture for residents and have them walk out of here with a, oh geez, we've misappropriated money. Nobody misspent money. Nobody went home and put money in their checking account and misappropriated it as is being spun. Misappropriation brings up theft and stealing. That didn't happen. Nobody did that. We overspent on legal fees, as we pointed out 2 weeks ago, because we have one legal battle, just one, in 2012, that was unforeseen, that cost us significant amounts of money. And that's really where we're over budget. And we can talk about the factors of that deal, but that's not with regard to this budget amendment. You know, I think it's very telling again that you didn't ask Everett any questions. You have no questions for Everett, but you'll paint the picture that we all got our hand in the cookie jar. And you're right, because we all voted unanimously. But you know, come down from the pedestal and say, yeah, our hands are all dirty. We're not trying to squirt perfume on the pig. There is no acknowledging of mistakes that needs to happen other than, yes, we had a town of Brookfield fight that we had to make. This isn't a late date. The district attorney, you know, we have a resident that worked in collaboration, or at least is keeping up to date other people on the town board as to their progress using the district attorney to smear and campaign. And so far, the district attorney, with regard to this budget amendment, has not pressed any charges, has concluded his investigation. As a matter of fact, dismissed it pretty darn fast. I think that, what was it, a couple of days that he looked at it and dismissed it as to say that there was nothing for him to look at. You know, are we cleaning our house? Are we doing our books? Are we closing them out? Yes. Is that a process that happens? Yes, it is. I don't think there's anything else for me to say other than pointing out the hypocrisy that, you know, we all have dirty hands burning, but yours are just as involved. With the exception of a $5,000 bill at which you refused to accept our attorney's advice, which has happened before and cost us time and money and effort to repair your refusal to accept the advice of our professionals. But here we go. This is what happened, and I stand by my motion to approve the budget amendments and take a vote.
Joe, for one thing, I won't be as long-winded as you were.
That's fine.
And going back to the previous board, I'd have to look back and see when the budget amendments were made and when I approved them and the votes on them. I don't have the access to that information. Second off, you keep going over to attorney's fees. I mean, that must really be upsetting you. Brian's talking about budget amendments, and you're talking about attorney's fees. You're changing the subject every time we get on budget amendments. These budget amendments should have been done on a timely basis, and that is the responsibility of the clerk to bring those forward. When we sit up here, I have no idea what's left in the budget for a line item. That's up to the clerk and Hector to bring forward. My hands are dirty. I'll agree with you to a certain extent. I made mistakes also, but I'm willing to admit to making those mistakes and do this now and go forward and correct those mistakes. And anybody who votes to approve this is doing a criminal act at this point. That would include you, Hector, Jamie, and Angie, in my mind. Because you're aware of the fact we've been doing it wrong, so I continue doing it.
I find it revealing that you've been approving expenses of bills and doing your job that you took an oath to do. And now you're telling the public that you've done so without any awareness of the overall budget expenditures of the town or the itemization of that. You've just approved them willy-nilly, like, oh yeah, hey, I'll just approve this? Or is it that you never took the time to simply ask Jamie, like so many times I had, hey Jamie, can I get a printout of the financial statement? I mean, it's a simple request. It's one that's provided to you very quickly when you ask for it. And if you're approving bills with, and you felt you didn't have the information to have asked for a financial statement as has been done in the past, I don't know if that's dereliction of duty to throw your legal issues around in criminal activity, but maybe it's dereliction of duty that you were approving bills, and not only approving them, but making motions, as I pointed out in previous meetings, actually first motions, which is different than a second motion for a discussion and different than a vote. The first motion is kind of like saying, hey, I really put my seal of approval on this, so much so that I want the board to approve it. Second can be just for discussion and to work out the facts, but when you've made first motions to approve these bills, and now you're telling us that you did that without any consideration or knowledge over where we were in the budget, and the primary cause of the need of budget amendments is the legal fees. They are linked together. You cannot separate, I mean, you can pretend and try to separate them, but absent the legal fees that are over budget, we have relatively little variance in the budget proposed and actual expenditures. And you can look that up, our budget's out there, you can get a copy of it, our audit's gonna be done shortly, you can look at that. There's relatively little expense there. So you're right, every time we talk about budget amendments, I refer to the attorney's fees, because that's the only item that was significantly out of joint from what we budgeted to what we spent.
Joe, can I just address you for a minute? And it's not a topic that we're going to get into in depth tonight, but Everett, at the last meeting, there was a discussion about purchase order policies. So Jamie sent that out to us, I want to say, a week ago or thereabouts. I think this is your work product, and I'm going to take a minute to praise you, okay? So you can stand in the glory.
This is outside, I mean, I love the fact that.
No, it is not. Just let me finish.
Look.
Let me finish, okay?
Sir, please.
No,
I think you had the floor.
No, allow me to finish for a quick minute. If you don't interrupt me, it'll take less than 1 minute. You can start timing. Here's what it says in your draft, Joe. You're recommending for any expenditure, even under $1,000, it could be to go get bolts at Hardware Hank. This is your recommendation, that a purchase order is needed on a town purchase order request form. The clerk, it's to be submitted to the clerk treasurer for any expenditure. The clerk treasurer is to confirm that it is within budget. If it's within budget,
Mr. Fisher,
let me finish.
No, I'm cutting you off now, because this is not on the agenda.
No, it is absolutely relevant. I'll tell you why it is
Mr.
relevant,
Fisher.
because listen to me, his proposal
Mr.
is.
Fisher, you are out of order.
No, I am not,
You
because
are
his
out of
proposal.
order.
his
Please,
pro-
Mr. Fisher, respect the process. We are now in budget amendments. I appreciate you
No,
have.
it is a relevant issue, because his proposal is that the clerk treasurer review every expenditure to see that it is within budget. I praise you for that. So why can't you simply say, here is the better day, we're gonna go there, we can have a group hug here and move on and be done with it. I applaud you for doing this, but you're not entitled to the hypocritical position of saying we're doing it right and then have a proposal like that, Joe. It doesn't wash.
Example,
Well, so go ahead, Mike.
sugar, then scat, there you go. Once again, read between the lines, folks. Keep campaigning, okay, keep politicking over there. It's sickening, it really is.
The document that you referenced, Brian, not a proposal. Back at a previous meeting, our last audit brought up the fact that our purchase order policy was not being followed. And this is some of my work product with regard to the purchase order policy. I had a meeting with Mike and with Jamie, and that is a ideas page. It's not a draft for proposal, it's an ideas page. That draft was given to Chief Buckholz, was given to Jamie, and it was also given to Mike for comment. We have a meeting next week. There's lots. I went to the City of Waukesha Fire Department so that I can understand more about how they would view this. And I can tell you that some of the very things that are on that paper, I have a problem with. I don't support them.
Well, let me ask a real simple question. Do you think the clerk treasurer should be confirming expenditures to see that they're within budget? That's real simple. Moving forward, we can't do anything about the
All
past.
right,
Do you
all
support
right,
that?
enough.
Oh, I'm asking
Enough
simple
of
questions.
lashing us, okay? Enough, Mr. Fisher.
It's a simple question.
Play to the crowd all you wish. Play to the crowd,
I'm
okay?
asking him a simple question.
Mr. Fisher, it's time now to let others have an opportunity, okay? You have made your case. You know, we all know that you do a lot of your professional work as an expert witness sitting in a courtroom. And your work this evening is exemplary for your case. And you've made many cases over time, and this is another one. And although you position yourself as being all-knowing on this issue, and you have produced a very impressive document with no less than 4 colors to it, that doesn't make you right. And taking things out of context doesn't make you right. And going to the DA doesn't make you right. And you have simply taken this body's time and our constituents' time ad nauseum, especially this evening. Most of what you've gone through have been items that we've gone through in the past. You refuse to accept anything other than your belief. You don't accept anything other than what you want to pontificate. I understand that. I accept that. That doesn't make you correct in your standing, and my position stands. You are misguided in your efforts, but maybe I take it back. You're not misguided in your efforts. You're very guided in your efforts. Your efforts are to provide what? Character assassination? Fine. If that is your goal, then you've done an admirable job of setting your case. It doesn't make you right, and it doesn't make your position correct. And you may have supporters in the group who are handing out your document, which tells me very clearly that this is a positioning paper. It is in no way a position to educate us or be a team member of any kind of this board. You and Mr. German have positioned yourself very clearly as trying to take pot shots at those of us that are trying to do work here. You have not availed yourself at any point in time in the 2 years that you've been a board member here to take any interest in the financial statements in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you were a no-show in the budget process for most of this year. So for you to lecture any of us who worked on this project in the manner that you have today before an election is simply telling. So you've chosen your position, that's fine. The people in the audience will certainly understand your position and perhaps those of us who have worked to produce a product. When we walked in the store, you weren't here, you had no idea because you had no interest in it in what we walked into. We have an audit Beautiful audit, sits on the shelf. We didn't have a way to run a financial statement. No financial statement ability at all. So do you think the folks that were in this building for the last, 50, 60 years did what you're proposing to be done? No, they couldn't. There was no possible way for them to do it. They had a module that allowed them to write checks. They had a module that allowed them to make deposits. They had no general ledger ability whatsoever. They put their transactions in a shoebox. That shoebox was on the front counter is still there. And once a month, the accountant, who was also the auditor, who was also the IT person, would come and pick up the shoebox. The shoebox would go to Delafield. It would stay in Delafield for maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks, and a beautiful bound book would come back that no one knew what was in. And that was our financial process at the town of Waukesha. Gee, while even Mr. German was here, and nobody objected, and nobody pontificated, and nobody made a display like they did today, okay? So the facts are that we now can indeed do what you are proposing. And in fact, we do what you are proposing, but you have never taken the time to ask the question. You have never once come in and said, hey, let's take a look at that budget versus actual document that you guys talk about, that you're developing and you're utilizing. I can tell you Mr. Banske has, because he takes an interest in it. And I can tell you, I have plenty of them, and Jamie has produced plenty for herself. You must think that we just sit around and write checks and don't think twice. That is an awful mischaracterization. We have taken this organization from a group that couldn't run a financial statement, didn't have the physical ability to run a financial statement, who had to wait 6 weeks to get a financial statement, to now we can press a button, and in any moment of time, if you were to choose to have an interest, we would produce that statement for you. Now, I think there's something to be said from taking an organization from not having any system to developing a system that gives us the detail that we have today. And instead of actually looking at what we've done in the last 2.5 years to bring the town of Brookfield, right, the town of Waukesha, into an ability to manage its fiscal affairs, obviously that must not make any difference to you. It doesn't make any difference to you that we did not dip into treasury monies over the course of the last year that you've been arguing about, but have actually been underspent by $250. And if we take the $250,000, and if we take the 2 line items that we for sure want to do, of course, the work, it wasn't just a savings in money, the ditching and the road repairs, we would still have $126,000 that we are within our budget levy. Not going into our treasury, but our budget levy amount. That's a significant issue. We are not taking money that we didn't levy. When we look at the amount of monies that were actually over budget, $103,000 in legal fees. I think we have been very demonstrative with how those legal fees were raised and where we were with those. I mean, Joe did, what, a half an hour presentation at our budget meeting in November explaining where those went, why they were done. And we had people in the crowd who asked us to increase our budget amount to be sure we had enough to support the town. We did not have people hitting us over the head saying, gosh, why did you do that? The other line items that are major, so 103 there out of 157. You can follow along if you like. 32,000 of that was ambulance. Now, you well know that that's not an overage amount, that we made the decision as a town board to not attribute dollars to ambulance. We put those dollars in the fire department. And because we now do our payroll in-house, we can keep very close track of where every dollar goes within our budget. That includes a very specific divvying up between fire department, ambulance, and inspection. And that $32,000 is simply a movement to make our financial statements that much cleaner, that much better, so that the fire chief can track the information, as can we. So what does that leave us? It's really a non-issue, right? We're not over. As the chief has pointed out to me, he was under budget, and he's right, under budget. So now we have accounting and auditing, we have other general government, we have some planning fees, we have the sheriff contract for some overages, and we have health and sanitation of $944. So of a $3 million budget, give or take, we are actually overspent by $20,000. I mean, and you have now lectured us for how long as to how poorly we've done and how poorly we've managed the town of Waukesha. Sir, I think that is as disingenuous a statement as you could possibly make. You are trying to paint a picture that simply isn't accurate, and I reject every part and parcel of what you have presented here this evening, what you have tried to pontificate to people in the community, and what you have done with DA Schimmel. It is a disservice to the town of Waukesha. The fact that you and Mr. German have put us on the front of the newspaper for these issues and more, time after time after time, is a disservice to us all with these kind of results. We will stick with the documentation that we have, and the documentation shows that we are well within budget. We are going to be returning $126,000 potentially to the Treasury or be allotted into a capital fund. So, if you think it is important to manage our dollars well, you have that. You have people who have done that particular job over the last 2.5 years, while we have fought the battles that we've had, while we've had to deal with the legal issues. And you very clearly pointed out that I have leadership responsibility for that, and I've taken it. And I've demonstrated it, and I've had significant help in doing it because we have good people who spend their time. Mr. Banske has spent a lot of time understanding the budget inside and out. It is a huge factor in our success. You and Mr. German have been nowhere. So for you to lecture us on how to manage a budget is wrong. You're choosing to do it for political purposes. That's your choice. But it's disingenuous to the people of the community to represent that we have done something wrong when we have done a good job with the town taxpayer money. And the statements speak for themselves. So you and your group will continue, I would assume, for another 2 weeks, probably 2 weeks from this coming Tuesday, and then these issues will no longer be these issues. Mr. German, for you to say that you don't have access to information, well, that's pretty silly.
No, I do not.
You do not,
And
well.
you're off track again. You're
Mr.
talking
German,
about
I
what
have the
you say.
floor at the moment, and if you'd like to be recognized, I'd be happy to have you respond, but I'm responding to
You want
your,
one hand or two?
Mr. German. Mr. German, at the last meeting, I shared with you that you were here when budget amendments were done. It's not a matter of dialogue, it's simply a matter of fact. It was because it wasn't a big deal. And you know what? It still shouldn't be such a big deal. But at that time, you know what some of the overages were? I think it was $150,000 in road repairs. So for you, again, to join Mr. Fisher in how we've done things wrong when we're basically off by 20 grand and we've already been very clear with the legal fees and how those came about, the statutes were made so that people do not hide information. I don't think with Sarah in the room and other newspapers that have reported that anyone could possibly say in any way, shape, or form that it has not been clearly defined that we are over on legal fees, okay? It's not as though we've hidden anything. And so again, we've got $20,000 in a $3 million budget. We're $112,000 over in revenues. We have underspent by $295,000. We are under budget. We fought the battles, and we are under budget by $295,000. That's what we should be talking about, not the fact that, what, we didn't do a budget amendment like everybody else does a budget amendment in the state? I mean, that's where we fall flat. So I don't know, Mr. Fisher, what else you would like to add at this point, or Mr. German, but I think it's important to recognize the overall picture, which is we've returned money to the Treasury, and we've protected the town taxpayers.
Angie, I don't disagree with you, you really care. What happened in 2000, I don't care how they were keeping the books. My issue is very simple, and it's very focused, and it's just on this issue. And if we all wanted to stand up and take a group bow for the finances of the town of Waukesha, I think we can do it. Answer Mr. Ham's question. He knows the answer to it. The town has no indebtedness whatsoever. We've got cash. There's no suggestion that anybody has stolen any of the money or whatever. It's very simple, but there are ordinances and statutes that need to be followed and for a good purpose. I guess my last comment, it's almost kind of a Shakespeare thing. Thou doth protest too much. Just that simple.
Well, I'm surprised the town survived with the hicks we had prior to you, James, you know, shoe boxes, and we never received financial statements. When we went over on the road repairs, it was a board decision to take the money out of the general fund for road repairs. That's how that developed. And it always amazes me, we have a person here on Skype that was chairman for 2 years in the town of Waukesha. And there was not one issue, budget issues or anything. And all of a sudden, all kinds of issues. The board we had was no good, the people we had were no good, they never did their job. I never heard any complaints coming from the town residents when we had that board. They always held the line on the budget. Taxes didn't go up and everything got done in the town of Waukesha.
Really?
Really?
Okay, well, they produced a financial statement, but they didn't know what was in it. There was nobody who was able to read a financial statement in the office.
How do you know that?
So, because I have emails that indicate that. So, it is a matter at this point of what's real. What's real is that we have, over the last 2.5 years, gotten control of our budgeting process, of our spending process, brought everything in-house, so we are able to issue information within seconds. We never had that opportunity here at the town of Waukesha since its existence, okay? Because we had vendors doing that work versus doing it in-house. And you have the ability now to throw stones because we've produced something. And so you have the opportunity to pick apart what we've produced. If we were still working strictly with a vendor, you wouldn't have that. In previous years, the auditing firm, which was also the bookkeeping firm, which was also the IT firm, would simply say it's time to do a budget amendment, and would send the form to Michaeline, and you and the rest of the board would approve it. And that's how it worked. And yeah, there was no question because nobody had the ability to question anything. So I will take our ability to analyze, produce, review, and save money over the previous system any day, even with the comments that you're making here today, because the town of Waukesha is much better off today than it was before. And no matter how many times you say it, the town of Waukesha is still better off it was before. And we now have a budget to actual document, which has been developed over the last 2.5 years, that now tracks the expenses so that we can get more and more specific with it, and anyone who asks can have a copy of it. That's an improvement. That's the thing that we could jump up and down about, but you know what? The town of Waukesha typically does, in the last 2.5 years, just rolls up its sleeve and does the job. It doesn't complain about what was done before. It simply does what needs to be done. And maybe we should have all whined a bit more about what we found, so that when you came today and told us exactly how badly we've done it, at least we have some sort of history of saying, gee, but this is where we were. So tonight, at least we can share the information, not because we want to pat ourselves on the back, but simply to offer an opposing view as to the case that you made earlier this evening, that you prepared for, distributed, and then presented. That is not in service to the town of Waukesha. It is simply a political motive, and I don't think there's any arguing on that. Now, we have no reason at this point. I can see the handwriting on the wall. We prepared for the handwriting that the two of you have presented. Let's take a vote on this particular issue.
Can I just ask one simple question, please? One very simple question. And I ask it of you, of Jamie, of Hector, and Joe. And I mean this in all sincerity. And Mike and Everett, you can jump in on it too. Bill, Some people live in the past, some people live in the present, some people live in the future, some all places. I told you, all our hands are dirty with this. We've been doing a good job with the things. What is the way forward with regard to budget amendments? Talk to the future, and I guess I'd be interested in hearing from each one of you. Hector, I'd be interested in hearing from you. You can provide us with counsel or whatever. What's the way forward? I don't want to throw any more mud at anybody. I don't want to have any more mud thrown at me. Enough of that. What's the way forward in the future? How are we going to do budget amendments from this point forward? That's what I want to hear.
Okay. First of all, I think it's important for me to preface my remarks by indicating to you that perhaps a lot of your comments, particularly the comments directed at myself, are being interpreted as a reflection of a misunderstanding of the role of the town attorney. You and I have had a number of conversations, private conversations, and public conversations, where I have attempted to describe to you what I see my role to be. And my role is to really, whether you subscribe to it or not, to represent the town, not to represent any particular supervisor. And that's what I've done in the 40 years that I've been practicing law, representing municipalities. And it pains me greatly to see this community go through what it has been going through the last few months. But that's an issue which is political rather than legal. I want to tell you to your face categorically that I reject any assertion on your part that I have acted in a situation where I have had a conflict of interest. Let me explain why. First of all, I, as a town attorney, do not have anything to do with the financial matters of the town. As I sit here, I have no idea how much the other attorneys that have been engaged by the town have been paid. On the other hand, I believe that each supervisor diligently goes through the bills and has an appreciation. I do not and have not played a role in the setting of the budget. I cannot explain to anybody how the budget came about. But be that as it may, I still represent the town as a whole. And it is my view that it serves no purpose for me to attempt to refute the comments that you directed towards me, but instead try to proceed in a positive way. Understand, I am not a shy puppy. You saw me earlier this evening questioning the people who were attempting to develop parts of your community, primarily because I'm interested in the future of your community. And I believe that in your own separate ways, you are interested in the future of the community. I can tell you that with regards to the provisions that you find in the statute and the advice that you've gotten, which has been modified, the reality is that the statutes and the ordinances say one thing and the practice is a different thing. And that's not an unusual thing in the law. It's regrettable, but it's not an unusual thing. You've asked a very direct question, and I will give you my advice. My advice is to, in all sincerity, consider a budget amendment at this point in time and move on. Mr. German characterized action on the budget amendment as criminal. I think he was just using language in a casual way. What you would be doing, and this was reflected if I understood your town auditor, what you would be doing would be following the general practice of most communities. Consider a budget amendment and move on. That's my advice. I do not feel that in previously advising at the last meeting that the procedural question allowed you to consider creating a conflict of interest in any respect. If anything, it was a mechanism that would allow you to come to grips with the reality that in certain categories you may have expended more than you allocated, probably a reflection of the lack of foresight, or a reflection more appropriately of not being able to anticipate the future with 2020 foresight. And a budget amendment is what is used in most communities to rectify that situation. You have not, as a community, exceeded the amount of money that you've appropriated. And in that regard, there is no, as far as I know, technical consequence for the community at this time, this community, to consider and pass a budget amendment.
Thank you. My question is just a little bit different, and I appreciate that. It was not intended for what we're going to do tonight. My question is, skipping tonight and going forward beyond here, Lee Teroni has said a budget is to be amended prior to a line item being exceeded, not after the fact. In fact, the clerk should be checking the town's budget line items to make sure there is enough money appropriated for each type of bill, and only write the check if there is sufficient money, and he references Wisconsin statutes 66.0607. My question is very simple and very direct. Do you subscribe to what Lee Teroni, the Assistant Legal Counsel for the Wisconsin Towns Association, has said? It's that simple.
My advice is very plain. Take action tonight. I am not going to pass judgment on something that you have recorded here that you understood in a third-party conversation. Well, it is not my role to second-guess what someone else is saying to you. You have asked me, what advice do you, Attorney De La Mora, as the town attorney, give us going forward from this moment? My advice, Mr. Fisher, is take action on the budget amendment tonight.
My question, Hector, is not about tonight. My question is, forget even for the minute what Attorney Teroni has recommended. Are you able to give us your legal opinion as to whether in the future we should be doing budget amendments prior to expending beyond budgetary appropriations? That's a simple yes or no.
As a witness in court, you're very familiar with the refrain that's been asked and answered. I stand on my previous answer.
It has not been answered.
Okay.
Mr. Fisher, again, you're beating it to death, right, for your own purposes, yes.
So let's call the question, have an open discussion on it.
I agree. You presented a document, and I hear you calling the question, but I was going to make one short comment. However you phrase this to the Towns Association, and whatever the interpretation is of a line item, can be a number of different things. And that's where I go back to your being misguided in certain efforts. Perhaps there is a change in language or understanding of a term. I would not begin to guess what, in your profession, your specific terminology and definitions are of being an architect and a professional engineer. And so the same is true. It has something to do, each profession has its own language, and perhaps your definition of a line item is different than each individual, broken down to 12 pages line items. So I think the advice that Attorney De La Mora is giving, and that Renee Messing has given, and that Lee Turno has given, is that you stay within your appropriation. And we have stayed within the large items within our appropriation. That is why we're getting the advice from council, and we've gotten the same advice from our auditor to simply move on. Now, we'll take a vote on this particular item. We have prepared, as you can see on the agenda, for an alternative method of getting the job done, which we're getting very used to. And we'll do a we'll do a name vote, please.
Chairman Banske,
Yes.
Supervisor Banske,
Yes.
Supervisor German,
No.
Supervisor Laska,
Yes,
Supervisor Fisher.
No.
So this amendment fails because it requires for a budget amendment a supermajority. In this case, it takes 4 people of the 5. So Mr. Fisher and Mr. German have affected their goal. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda.